Chapter 1. Saguaro. Today I managed to wake up at 8 o'clock this morning. I can hardly believe it. Then again, I can hardly believe that I am finally retired. I made it. Somehow, those 20 years went by in the blink of an eye and agonizingly slow. My family has a long history of answering the call to serve. But as a black man from Georgia, I carried my own quiet determination into the ranks. Standing here today, I'm just deeply thankful to have made it out alive, and with all my limbs intact. The world changed for me in middle school. To this day, I can still see footage of those planes flying into the towers. I still do not entirely understand why the teachers wheeled the heavy TVs into our classrooms that morning, forcing children to watch history break in real time. That was the day I learned what fear felt like. That day, the illusion of safety was shattered. By the time I graduated from high school, the war had already been raging for 4 years. Raised to respect duty and honor, I enlisted believing I would make a real, lasting difference. In the end, the grand notions faded, replaced by a simple, overwhelming gratitude just to make it back to American soil. Being a soldier is a tricky thing. You are filled with grand ideals of heroism and righteousness. But when you are there, when the smoke clears and you see and hear the cost firsthand, everything changes. Idealism dries up. Eventually, you stop fighting for the big abstract concepts and start fighting just to get back home. You dream of a hot meal, a quiet room, and sleeping through the night without the heavy, constant terror of what tomorrow might bring. Now that chapter has closed. I am looking forward to finally settling down and starting over. After 10 years of marriage, a divorce left me navigating life on my own. No kids, just a clean slate and a horizon full of possibilities. I chose Tucson, Arizona. It is a place I have wanted to call home for an exceptionally long time. The dry desert heat is quite different from the humid, slow-moving air of my Georgia roots, but I can adapt to about anywhere. For the first time in 20 years, the time belongs entirely to me. To celebrate my newfound freedom, I will take a drive out past the city limits, deep into the rugged expanse near Saguaro National Park. I want to see the desert at dusk, to watch the sun drop behind the mountains and paint the sky in shades of purple and gold. I parked my truck at a remote trailhead, grabbed a canteen, and walked until the sounds of the highway completely faded away. The silence out there is absolute. It is exactly what I need. Until the air began to hum. At first, I thought it was a low-flying military drone out of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. But the vibration did not just echo in my ears. It rattled the fillings in my teeth. The desert wildlife went dead silent. No crickets, no cicadas, nothing. 100 yards ahead, hidden between a cluster of massive saguaro cacti, the air began to shimmer and warp like a heat mirage on steroids. A massive, sleek silhouette materialized out of thin air, cloaked in technology that made my jaw drop. Before my brain could even process the word spacecraft, 3 figures dropped from the hull. They are not human. They were towering, heavily built, and wore armor that looked both ancient and impossibly advanced. 20 years of muscle memory took over before fear could even knock on the door. I didn't have my service weapon, but I had terrain in my wits. As the first warrior advanced, waving a heavy metallic restraint, I ducked beneath his reach. I used his own forward momentum to drive my elbow straight into the seam of his armor beneath his jaw. The impact cracked like thunder, and the giant stumbled back with a grunt of genuine shock. Not today, I growled, pivoting to face the second one. I managed to grab a heavy metal prod from the second alien's grip, sweeping his legs out from under him and driving the blunt end into his chest. For a split second, standing under the desert stars, I thought I might make it back to my truck. But I was fighting technology I did not understand. The third warrior, watching his comrades struggle against a lone human, didn't bother engaging in hand-to-hand combat. He raised a strange, rifle-like weapon. A blinding flash of blue energy erupted from the barrel, hitting me square in the chest. There was no pain, just an instantaneous, terrifying paralysis. My muscles locked up instantly, and my knees hit the gravel. As my vision began to tunnel into blackness, the last thing I saw was the alien commander looking down at me, nodding in grim approval. Then the desert vanished, and the darkness took me. The first thing that returned was the smell, acrid, metallic, and heavy with the scent of recycled air and unfamiliar sweat. I groaned, my muscles screaming, as the residual effects of the alien weapons slowly wore off. I tried to move my hands, but the cold bite of heavy restraints around my wrists anchored me to a bulkhead. "Take it easy, brother." A low, raspy voice echoed from the shadows beside me. "Moving too fast will just make nausea worse." As my eyes adjusted to the dim, pulsing red light of the cargo hold, the reality of my situation set in. I was not in the Arizona desert anymore. I was crammed into a massive, cavernous holding pen, and I was not alone. Dozens of men, some human, but many others completely alien in shape, size, and color, were in other cells. It was miserable, terrified prisoners gathered from a dozen different worlds. Before I could even ask where we were, heavy steel doors slammed open with a concussive hiss. Towering guards, armored and brandishing glowing energy prods, began unlocking cell doors, unchaining us, and barking orders in a harsh, guttural tongue. The transition was a blur of violence and chaos. The moment they marched us out of our cells, we were aggressively sorted. Aliens with multiple limbs were pushed into one corridor. Hulking reptilian beings were forced into another. The remaining human men and I were driven down a steep, rocky tunnel chiseled directly out of the subterranean earth. The heat hit us instantly, a suffocating dry heat that made the Arizona desert feel like a breeze. Shoved into a separate set of long rows of cramped, iron-barred cells carved right into the stone walls, with the heavy iron door slamming behind us with a definitive, hopeless clang. I pushed myself up, wiping the red dust from my face, instantly kicking into survival mode. I inspected the bars, the stonework, looking for any tactical advantage. "Don't waste your energy on the bars, son. Touch them and it'll cook your skin right off." I turned toward the back of the cell. Sitting calmly on a stone ledge was an older black gentleman. Despite the dirt and the grueling environment, the man sat with a straight, disciplined posture that I recognized instantly. He looked to be about 65 years old, with gray hair and weathered lines etched deeply into his face. But his arms and shoulders were thick boned with a dense, hard-earned strength. "Name's Robert," the older man said, offering a firm, calloused hand as I approached. "Ralph," I replied, shaking it. I noticed a faint, faded tattoo on Robert's forearm, the distinct insignia of a military unit. "You're military?" I asked. A grim, knowing smile touched Robert's lips. "Yes, I served, from 1988 to 1999. Gulf War. I thought I'd seen the worst mankind had to offer. Turns out, the universe is a whole lot bigger and uglier. Got snatched out of my fishing boat off the coast of Savannah about 5 years ago." I leaned against the stone wall, taking in the weight of the man's words. 5 years? How are you still alive?" "Because I know how to adapt, and I know how to watch," Robert said, his voice dropping to a low, serious whisper. "Listen to me close, Ralph. You've got that look in your eye, the soldier look. That'll keep you alive, but it can also get you killed quick if you don't play this smart. Here's how the process works." Robert pointed a thick finger toward the tunnel outside. "Tomorrow morning, they're going to open these cells and drag us to the lower levels. They'll test your physical limits, see how much weight you can carry, how long you can swing a plasma pick before you drop. Every block has a daily quota of raw energon ore. You hit your quota, you get a ration of bread and clean water. You miss your quota twice, and they transfer you to the deep rifts. Nobody ever comes back from the rifts. The warriors run the place, but they don't do the day-to-day beating." I absorbed the information, my tactical mind mapping out the layout of this prison. Who's running this whole operation? There's always a commander. "A warlord named Van," Robert said, his expression darkening. "He's brutal. Word is he is coming down here in a few weeks for a personal inspection of the lower quadrants. When he arrives, the guards will be on high alert, looking for any excuse to make an example out of someone." I stared through the iron bars into the dark, echoing tunnels of the mines. I am far away from Georgia, and even further away from Tucson, but I am still a soldier. "Let him come," I muttered quietly. As time passes, the more the mines become a test of psychological warfare as much as physical endurance. Surviving meant relying on the tight-knit circle Robert and I had built. But by the end of the first week, our duo became a trio. His name was Jake. He was a young 20-year-old man who looked entirely out of place in the brutal subterranean trenches. Jake was quiet, kept to himself, and carried a gentle nature that made him an instant target for the overseers. A man's orientation did not matter to the guards, only his muscle mass and his daily output, but Jake struggled to keep up. One afternoon, Robert pulled Jake into our cell. "You won't last another week at this place, son," he said, while tearing a piece of his own meager ration of bread and passing it over. "You have to meet the quota, or they'll drag you down to the rifts." Jake took the bread, his hands trembling, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at me, then at Robert, deciding in an instant who he could trust. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "I can help us," Jake said. "Both of you. I have a secret, but if the guards find out, they'll cut my tongue out." I crossed my arms. Instincts alert. "We're listening?" "The language the Krigere speaks, the Manadiet tongue," Jake whispered, glancing toward the iron bars. "I can understand it. Not perfectly, but well enough to catch what they're planning." I exchanged a stunned, skeptical look with Robert. "Kid, that's an alien language. They're from the other side of the galaxy." "I know it sounds crazy," Jake insisted, his voice urgent. "But my grandmother was from Norway. She raised me speaking Norwegian. When the guards shout at each other, the syntax, the roots of the words, the phonetics, it's incredibly similar. I don't know why or how it's possible, but I can read their movements based on what they say to each other." The strategic value of Jake's secret was staggering. In a prison, information was life. If Jake could decipher the guards' conversations, they would know about surprise inspections, quota changes, and guard rotations before they happen. "Keep your mouth shut," I commanded gently but firmly, placing a heavy hand on Jake's shoulder. "From this moment on, you don't react to a single word they say. You look as confused and terrified as every other captive in this block. You let them think you're just another piece of broken cargo." "And what do I do about my quota?" Jake asked. "If I can't dig fast enough—" "Don't worry about the digging," Robert interjected with a grim smile, flexing his thick shoulders. "You're looking at 2 seasoned infantrymen. Ralph and I will carry your weight. We'll covertly dump some of our mind ore into your bin every afternoon to make sure you hit your mark. You keep your ears open, and we will keep you alive." The pact was sealed. In return, Jake became our invisible radar. He sat quietly in the corners of the mines, looking weak and defeated, while quietly filtering the Krigere commands. Slowly, piece by piece, Jake began translating the whispers of the guards, gathering vital intelligence on the layout of the facility and information regarding Warlord Van's impending arrival. By the end of the first week, Robert, Jake, and I had our routine down to science. Robert and I would split the labor, covertly shoveling raw energy and ore into Jake's bin to keep the kid above his daily quota. In return, Jake kept his head down, his face blank, and his ears wide open. He was mapping out guard rotations and listening to the Krigere complain about their shifts. We had a system. We were surviving. Then, on the 8th day, everything changed. It started with a sudden, frantic lockdown. The heavy iron blast doors at the end of the cell block slammed shut, and the regular sector guards were abruptly ordered out, replaced by a high-ranking Krigere armored squad. Sitting in the dark corner of the cell, Jake's eyes went wide. He leaned toward me and Robert, his voice a terrified whisper. "They're panicking. A specialized transport just landed from Earth. The scout team made a massive mistake. They brought a female." I exchanged a stunned look towards Robert, who then explained that over his 5 years of imprisonment, they have never brought a woman to these mines. As the blast doors hissed open, 2 guards marched down the corridor, with a single captive walking slowly between them. It was a woman. She was dressed in attire as if she were in a play. Her hair was pulled back into a bun. She was scared and looking around at all the cells, trying to understand where she was. The Krigere guards were adjusting the sleeping quarters. She was not sent to the dark cells with the men. She was given her own separate section of the block. The Manadiet guards seemed to handle her with unexpected, careful gentleness, a stark contrast to the rough violence they showed the rest of us. But no amount of comfort could erase the terrifying truth. She was light years away from Earth. That night, the entire block fell into a heavy, haunted silence. I could hear her cries throughout the cell block. It wasn't a quiet sob. It was the deep, agonizing crying of someone who felt entirely alone in the universe. Her voice carried a natural, resonant depth that echoed softly through the stone corridors, vibrating through the iron bars of every cell in the quadrant. All the men in the surrounding blocks could hear her. Jake, Robert, and I stood at the bars, staring down the corridor toward her section. I am sure that every man in the sector felt a heavy ache in his chest, a desperate, human urge to cross the walkway, break the doors down, and comfort her. But we are locked away, completely helpless. I could not sleep. I stayed awake in the dark, keeping a silent vigil, listening to her tears cut through the subterranean quiet of this dreadful planet. She was alone. She was terrified. And as the long hours ticked away toward dawn, that night I made a vow to myself that I would find a way to reach her.